Whole Baltimore family, hey, what's going on? Thanks for tuning in and hanging out with us. This weekend, we kick off a new sermon series called Unbelief. It's about stepping into the tension of faith and doubt. Hey, listen, we all doubt. We all have these moments of unbelief, but those things are not bad. Those are not things that we should be ashamed of. And so we're going to dive into this tension, kicking off this weekend in Mark chapter number 9. So I'm excited for you guys to hang with us. And I hope that you would journey with us, take some good notes. And once again, hey, thanks for tuning in. June 23rd, 1940, a 4.5-pound premature baby girl was born to a woman named Blanche Rudolph in north central Tennessee. The prognosis for this baby girl was not good early on. She had things like measles and mumps and chicken pox, even double pneumonia. She was also told at some point that she had polio and would never walk in her life. But Blanche refused to believe this prognosis. She found a doctor 50 miles away in Nashville at Fisk University, because at that time, Tennessee was segregated. Blanche was African American, and there just wasn't adequate health care. So for 2 years, Blanche would take her baby girl twice a week to Fisk University to get help. She then was given braces to try to help her walk. And then the family participated in physical therapy to help this baby girl try to walk. But it wasn't until she was 12 years old that this little girl could actually walk on her own. The remarkable thing about this is just 4 years later, at the age of 16, this little girl, who we know as Wilma Rudolph, went on to win a bronze medal in the 1956 Olympics in the 4x100 meter relay. Following that, Wilma Rudolph went on in the 1960 Olympics to win 3 gold medals, the first woman ever to win 3 gold medals in Rome in 1960. This would have never happened if Blanche Rudolph had have received the diagnosis that she was given. She refused to believe this and fought for her baby girl. This is an incredible story about the power of belief and how it literally shifts the trajectory of our lives. But we've seen these kinds or heard or read of these kinds of stories throughout history. I'm thinking of people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who faced major resistance inside of his camp and outside of his camp when he presented this idea of nonviolence during the civil rights movement, when many people thought that this was a bad idea. And we see the impact of Dr. King's deep belief in this movement. And we see the future of our world is different as a result of his deep belief. What about the famous painter Vincent van Gogh? Many have heard of the name of Van Gogh, and he's a prolific painter that painted over 900 paintings in his life. But you might not know that Van Gogh only sold one of his paintings, but it didn't stop him from believing in the significance of his work. Stories like this we've been captivated by. We've seen them in movies. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite movies back in the day, Lean on Me. It's about this principal named Joe Clark, who was played by Morgan Freeman. And Joe Clark had a deep belief that East Side High in New Jersey that had issues with drugs and students dropping out. And it was a failing school. But Joe Clark had a deep belief that this school could succeed. And he eventually turned this school around. Some of us in our personal lives have even these kinds of stories of deep belief. Maybe somebody told you you couldn't, or you shouldn't, or you wouldn't, and you didn't accept that. You believed something different, and there was a different outcome in your life. Fundamentally, I think we understand how belief works in our lives and what it can unlock. But what about when there is a belief, but there's no breakthrough? Or what about when I've done everything that I thought I can do and I should do, and it still went wrong? Or what I was expecting didn't happen? Or maybe what if nothing failed or nothing went wrong? Just what I thought would happen didn't happen. Or I couldn't make sense of the scenario that was being played out, or I couldn't make the math work, or the pieces just don't seem to fit. And we just come to the conclusion, hey, I'm just not really sure that I believe. Well, this weekend we kick off a new sermon series about this tension of belief. As a matter of fact, the series is called Unbelief, a series about faith and doubt. And I think it's critical for us to wrestle with this, especially in the midst of kind of what has been happening, particularly in Christendom over the last recent years. We've been seeing and hearing terms like deconstruction, where people who are maybe were followers of Jesus or consider themselves to be Christian, they're deconstructing their faith as a result of some things that have happened or some things that they have seen. We're also seeing statistically that there's a growing group that we call the nones. Well, this is short for non-affiliates, meaning people are disassociating with being Christian. And they're not necessarily saying they don't believe in God per se. Some do, but they're really just saying, hey, I'm just kind of disengaging from this whole idea of what it means to be Christian. And I'm not really sure exactly what I believe. And there are many, many reasons for that. And we won't get into the weeds of that in this series, because the purpose of this series is not to defend Christianity or faith apologetically. It's actually just to affirm that doubt is not bad, that unbelief is not a negative thing. It's to help us to understand that doubt is not the enemy of faith. And I would argue to understand that engaging in doubt often leads to significant breakthrough in our lives. And listen, if we're being honest, no matter where we are on the faith spectrum, we all have doubt. And that's the reason why I want to zoom in on Mark chapter 9 this weekend. So if you have a Bible, you can follow along with us, or you got an app. And if you have neither, don't worry about it. We'll have the words up on the screen for you. This just happens to be one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And I would even call it a prayer in the Bible. And it's this tension that I think brilliantly captures the tension between faith and doubt. It's a story of a man and his son who has been possessed by an evil spirit. And Jesus is on the scene, his disciples are, and we see kind of how this whole thing plays out in Mark chapter 9. So we'll start at verse number 14. Follow along with me. When they came to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the scribes disputing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were amazed and ran to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about?" Some from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't. He replied to them, you unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him to me. So they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, it immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell from the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. How long has this been happening to him? Jesus asked the father. From childhood, he said. And many times it has thrown him into the fire or water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can, everything is possible for the one who believes. Immediately the father of the boy cried out, I do believe. Help my unbelief. This weekend, I just want to use for a simple subject to tag with this message. Embrace the tension. Embrace the tension. When it comes to faith, I think one of the first things that we can do is embrace the tension that faith brings into our lives. I think we have a natural human tendency to try to remove or explain away or do away with or try to solve tensions. And this sometimes causes us to just embrace something that's just easier for us to manage. Something that we don't necessarily have to wrestle with. But many times it's the wrestling and it's the embracing of the tension that we need to help us grow. I love what Barnabas Piper says in his book, Help My Unbelief, which is centered around this passage in Mark 9 that we just read. He says this, Christians who do not know the tension of I believe, help my unbelief, might not be Christian at all. The reason for this is because to follow Jesus and to have the faith that he teaches is full of tensions, y'all. I mean, like significant tensions. I mean, we're asked to do good that doesn't feel good, to reflect the good that God desires in the world, yet the reaction of the culture around us is not always good, but God says that it's good for you. I mean, let's just wrap our heads around that for a minute. Literally, part of the tension in believing what the scriptures teach us is to go against the grain of the culture that we live in. So that is calling us to a life of tension and to believe and to have faith that it is good or will produce something good in our lives. What we see in Mark 9 perfectly captures what a crisis of faith looks like. When we think about the crisis of faith, I think we need to think about a couple of things. Unbelief is really related to either unmet expectations or the lack of evidence. And the man in this story is expecting his boy to be healed. There's evidence of that. He's probably heard, I'm sure he's heard of this, but it still doesn't happen. Before we kind of get into the story and we kind of unpack the things that I want to just share with us, I think that one of the key things that we have to do first is I think we need to speak about how it seems like Jesus is frustrated and upset, or he actually is, and he rebukes the disciples for their unbelief. So is Jesus rebuking them for not believing? So is unbelief a bad thing? Well, let's just understand what's really happening here. Jesus is simply frustrated with the disciples because they're not operating in the power and the authority that he's given to them. So that's number one. And then secondly, Jesus is responding this way because he understands that there is an adversarial audience, the Pharisees and the scribes, who are making light and maybe enjoying the fact that his disciples could not do what he had taught them to do. And so he's rebuking them also. But he's not rebuking this idea of unbelief, and he's certainly not rebuking this man. And so I think I wanted to just put that into context for us before we dive into the rest of this text for the rest of our time. There are two things that I want to highlight for us in this story that I think can help us embrace the tension of belief and unbelief. Number one, and we're going to take our cue from the father in this story, is I think we need to be honest. The reason that this is my favorite prayer in the Bible, and some might argue that it's not a prayer, it's actually an exchange between this man and Jesus, but that's all prayer is actually talking to God. And the reason why it's one of my favorites is because my guy, he just keeps it 100 with Jesus. And he's up front with the tension that he's feeling. And it's an obvious tension because when Jesus shows up on the scene, he's arguing with the disciples and these scribes. And I think so many times when we're confronted with certain realities in our lives and we're confronted with certain tensions, we often maybe ignore them or we try to explain them away. Maybe we just blindly follow in one particular direction so we don't have to deal with certain things, or maybe we even try to dismiss. And none of those responses reflect what it means to be honest in moments of tension. I'm thinking of a conversation that I was having recently with someone very close to me, and they were sharing with me that where they are in their life, they're not really sure where they are with God. There's some unbelief that has crept in and made this person feel as though they're uncertain about maybe things that they had previously believed. There's some things that have come up and things that they are confronting in their life and they're processing. And there's some things that were just embraced at one point. And there were some things that were just accepted, but then things happen to cause some confrontation or the confronting of those things to make them feel like, hey, I'm not really sure. And here is my response to this person who's very close to me, and this would be my response to you. If you're feeling that way, you're probably closer to God than you've ever been before. Because those things that were just accepted without thought and without wrestling, they weren't really true to you. Now you're at a place now where you can really confront those things. And truth sometimes causes us to have to wrestle with things that we doubt, and we're at the doorstep of doubt. But I think it brings us closer to the truth in the end. Listen, doubt is not the enemy of faith. Actually, it is a doorway to breakthrough. And by the way, doubt does not equal or mean the absence of truth. It just means that there's a lack of certainty, which is a part of living. It's a part of life. This is why we cannot live with some aspect of faith in our life. It doesn't matter if we're Christian, if we're Hindu, if we have some other faith, if we're atheist, agnostic, or whatever the case may be. You have to live your life with some aspect of faith. We are just made to believe and put our trust in something. Mark 9, this passage that we just read, this father is pursuing healing for his son because he believed. There was some belief in him that was a catalyst for him to take his son to the disciples. There's evidence of healing that he may have heard about. At this point, the reputation of Jesus is getting around. So he's aware of the miraculous. But the man is like tripping right now because he's like, yo, I brought my boy to your boys and it didn't go down like I thought it would. And he told Jesus exactly what happened and how he felt about it. And that's exactly what we should do. It's okay to be honest about how we feel with what's going on in our lives. As a matter of fact, if you just go back and you read in the book of Psalms and you look at how David prayed and the things that he said, David was absolutely honest with God, frustrated with God. As a matter of fact, commanding God to do certain things in his life. And you know what it said about David? That he was a man after God's own heart. It's because God can handle us pushing back against him. God can handle our frustrations and our anger. And it says that God is not concerned about outward appearance. He's concerned about our heart and all of the things that are in our hearts. But you know what's holding us back? What's holding us back often is not unbelief itself. God understands that and expects that. But what's holding us back and keeping us in this holding pattern is our lack of honesty about our unbelief. So number one, and we take an IQ from this father who's dealing with this issue with his son, is we got to be honest. The second thing is, I think we need to examine in whom or in what is our hope. I'm going to say that again. Examine in whom or in what is our hope. Notice in this story that the man says to Jesus, I brought my boy to your disciples. I think this is a critical observation for several reasons. Number one, often our disappointment is not in Jesus, it's in his disciples. It's in the people who say they follow him. This man expected a different outcome because he was dealing with the disciples. And if we're truly being honest, there are many people who say that they follow Jesus or that they're Christians, but their life is not a reflection of the fruit of God's Spirit in their life, like love and joy and peace and perseverance and self-control. All of those fruits, right? There should be evidence and there should be a display, but yet we have been often let down in part because we are all human. But this man is like, yo, I went to your disciples, and so I was expecting something different. Hasn't that happened to all of us at some point? And don't we continue to see that? People who embrace the label, but don't necessarily reflect that in their life. There are many people who have an association with Jesus, but they don't display his power in their life. And it also makes me wonder, where was this man's hope? And in whom did he have his hope? Was it in Jesus and the power of what he could do? Was it just in these disciples and in these people? And then, oh, by the way, what about even the disciples? I mean, what about them as well? And what was their hope? Was it their routine? Was it a particular formula? What was actually happening here that they could not reflect what Jesus had taught them? Number two, and this is a big one in terms of a second observation that I'm seeing here that I think we need to elevate. Because of the disciples' failure, I believe this man projected that same possibility onto Jesus. Check this out. He says to Jesus in this exchange, but if you can do anything. Now, the disciples had just failed, right? To drive out this evil spirit. They couldn't do it. And so now he has this unbelief that's crept in and this doubt. And now he's literally talking to the one who can make it right. And he's saying, but if you can, he's projecting failure onto the situation because of what he's previously experienced. And Jesus said, if I can, like, bro, do you understand who you're talking to and who I am? And here's the thing. If we're honest, our hope and our belief has been deflated by people. And we take that defeat and we take that deflation and we're carrying that and we bring that to God, almost as if like, well, I'm not sure that this can really happen because of what I've experienced with other people. And it's a projection onto God. It doesn't reflect who God is. And I think some people are walking away from following Jesus or what it means to be Christian, not because of what God has or hasn't done in their life, but it's because of what they've seen in other Christian people, people who say that they follow Jesus. And listen, part of me understands. Part of me is like frustrated as well, because I am a follower of Jesus. And I'm like, yo, y'all making me look bad. Y'all making Jesus look bad. But guess what? Jesus can handle that. And if you find yourself in that situation, or you know people in that way, that you know people who are thinking in those terms and in that way, have compassion upon them. But also understand it's not a reflection of who Jesus is. We all have sin, which literally means a separation from God. It means that the world is broken. But God, through Jesus, is restoring that brokenness. And if our hope is in him, and it has to be him, in him, and not in those who follow him. It has to be in him. Because in those of us who follow him, sometimes we do fall short. And I just want to pause right here, and I just want to offer a quick apology for anyone who has just experienced deep hurt, manipulation, or any of those sorts of things by people who say they follow Jesus. People who say that they are Christians, but they're not displaying the fruit of the Spirit. I'm not sure that they're actually Christian at all. And I want to just say that the love of God is perfect. And at the end of the day, these actions have nothing to do with the character of God and how much he loves us. Let me see if I can bring us in for a landing this weekend. We have so much to unpack in this series, and there's so much that I want to say, but I'm just kind of setting the groundwork for us as we continue on. But here's how I want to bring us to a close. I was reading an article this week called "The Biochemistry of Belief." Fascinating article. And it's unpacking how belief literally influences everything about us. Literally, like every cell in our body. Think about this. Every cell in our body is aware of our thoughts. And our thoughts are connected to what we believe. To quote this article, it said the sources of belief include environment, events, knowledge, past experience, visualization, etc. And one of the biggest misconceptions people often harbor is that belief is a static intellectual concept. Let's think about that for just a second. What this means is that our actions and our engagements actually influence our belief and our unbelief more. So the things that we've previously talked about already. So being honest with how we feel, that's a non-static active engagement. And asking ourselves, like, why do we feel uncertainty, and what actions have influenced, or who has influenced this, is exactly what we need to do. And it's exactly what Jesus wants us to do with him. Listen to what Jesus says to the man, the disciples, and everyone watching. This failed attempt, this thing that has caused this unbelief, this situation that has become problematic. He said, bring it to me. Bring the boy to me, is what he said. And it's an invitation for all of us to bring those hurts, those frustrations, those disappointments, those things that maybe have contributed to our unbelief. Bring it to Jesus. Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, he said, come to me, all of you who are burdened. I will give you rest. This is important to understand because he didn't promise resolutions. He promised rest. He didn't promise answers to all things. He promised rest, which is sometimes in the midst of tension, in the midst of unresolved things. He didn't even promise that we wouldn't have disappointment at times. He promised rest. Now, just spoiler alert, if you continue on in Matthew 9, Jesus does heal this boy. And when he does, people think that he's dead, but he is not, and he actually is brought to life, or is now rid of this evil spirit. But sometimes that isn't always our ending, or sometimes we're just sitting in the tension of that. But I love what the prophet Isaiah says, and this is a proclamation of and about Jesus. He's making all things new. Well, what does that mean? That Hebrew word new is related to formation. Because part of what the tension of unbelief does in our lives is it forms us and it shapes us, and it causes a tension that we don't necessarily love, but it has a purpose. And what Jesus is interested in our lives is our transformation, not closing the gaps in our intellection. Because if he did that, then we would just rely on our thinking and our intellect. And it would hold us back from fully experiencing the life that Jesus came to give us and the fullness of joy that he wants us to have despite whatever our circumstances are. So as we conclude this weekend, this whole idea of embracing the tension is a difficult one, I know. But we can look at what's happening in our culture right now to really see the implications of not embracing the tension. We can see the implications of trying to pursue life in a way that is absolute, that you must believe this, or you must think this, or you must land in this way. But it's okay to have unbelief. It's okay to have doubt. But I want to encourage you this weekend to bring those doubts and bring those tensions to Jesus and pursue him with them, because I promise you they will bring us closer to him, and they will bring us closer to a breakthrough. And that breakthrough doesn't always mean the resolution that we hope for, but it will lead to the transformation that Jesus wants to see in us. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for how you're working in our lives. Thank you for some of these unresolved things. And that might be a strange thing to pray, to thank you for things that are unresolved that might be leading to our unbelief. But God, these are the areas in our lives where you're working and you're wanting to reveal yourself to us. So God, we say, many of us, that, yeah, there are things that we do believe or times that we do believe, but help our unbelief. Will you come into those areas where we are uncertain and where we have doubt? Will you, one, be with us like you said you would? Or will you begin to transform us and draw us closer to you? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, God bless you guys. We'll see you next week. I hope you really enjoyed this message. Hope you were challenged and stretched by it. There are a couple of resources that I just want to throw out there real quick. There's a book called Help My Unbelief by Barnabas Piper. You might want to check that out. There's also a podcast called In Faith and Doubt that you can find wherever you can get podcasts. And it is specifically around this area of unbelief. So stay tuned with us. Also, lastly, thank you for those who invest in Hope Baltimore. If you want to partner with us financially and give, there's a link on the screen. God bless you. See you next time.